one of the things I feel is that it's impossible for a reconstructed economy to work without savings. And I think the lesson of Germany's success has been that's a savings-driven economy as opposed to a consumption-driven economy, which really describes most of the rest of Europe. Do you think that savings are central to any, if you like, long-lasting economic recovery? And I think this is a very important question, because the more you print money, the more you destroy savings, because you're transferring capital from savings. It's capital destruction. What do you think that they might place an emphasis on savings in Spain, the new government?
People are beginning to say this, and the connection is savings and investment.
Exactly.
Investment is there because you get the future consumption. You hope to make a profit, but it's savings and investment. People don't seem to understand that investment is consumption. You use resources.
So often one reads comment that you know, you've got the savings paradox and all this sort of rubbish.
It's an old story that comes from 1936 and,
yes.
and a man called Lord Keynes. Well, savings is investment, is consumption. You consume hours of workers and you consume resources and whatnot. So there's no opposition between savings and consumption. It's only that consumption must come further down the line, and that you should look for savings and the right atmosphere for savings, for investment, and that needs savings.
That needs
indeed.
Savings, yeah.
And it needs savings not only in the way we're thinking now, but also for our retirement, and to take the place of some of the state activity in pensions and other things like that. And that change in mentality has to come. People will have to save more from much earlier to be sure that they have a comfortable retirement.
Indeed. So really, I think what we can tell the new government is that they must encourage savings, because without that, then you know, the changing the law about employment hours or whatever isn't actually going to count for very much. It's savings that is probably the most important thing.
Changing the not the law of retirement, the changing of the labour laws are also very important. It's obvious that the Spanish labour market doesn't work, because when at the end of the day, if you go to one of those local markets, you see all the fish on the slabs there with ice on it. At the end of the day, nobody's bought it. Price must be wrong.
Yes.
And so our labour market is not working. We have a number of people who are ensconced in their old jobs, and in fact their real wages have gone up during the crisis in Spain, and then you have half the youth not working, or working in different hidden ways, or perhaps in weekly jobs and so on. And that is not only morally unjustified, but it also hurts the future growth of Spain, but also there must be something that is stopping the young from finding jobs. And also that's promoting the idea that you don't really need a job, and what's good in life to have a lovely time, and we have rights, we want rights, don't know who pays for them, and so on. So there's a social mentality that comes with unemployment, and that can be is a tragedy in Spain.
It is a tragedy, and particularly with such a high level of youth unemployment as well. As I understand it, it's really the highest in Europe, just about.
It is the highest, and it must be 46% of young people from 16 to 25 are unemployed or officially unemployed. And that is very bad, because when you have a job that lasts for a week or for 2 months, then you're not trained. You don't go up the ladder in the company. And then there's another thing, which is the difficulty of creating a new company. There's a lot of red tape that stops you from doing that, and so on. We could go on saying it's the framework of the laws, of economic laws, that has to be changed, and to do that you have to be a very courageous government. Trade unions in Spain are financed by the government.
Indeed.
And by the European Union, but not by the dues of their members. Now that should change, because if they're financed by the government and not by members, then they don't look after the members. They look perhaps after their small number of members, but they certainly don't look after the unemployed.
Pedro, broadening it out a bit, we're all on a dollar standard. And so what goes on in America and the Fed is of fundamental importance to all of us, and we can't operate in a vacuum. What's your view of the quantitative easing that the Fed has engaged in? And I know that they don't have QE3, but they do seem to have an open checkbook, if you like, for anyone who needs any money. It seems that nobody is too big to fail. Nobody's too small to fail, perhaps. What's your take on this, and where is it going to take us eventually? What does it lead to?
Well, our monetary system is a partial reserve system in that it's based on paper money, and the reserves or the cash that banks have to operate is multiplied by 5, 6, 7 times, so that there's a sort of general leveraging in the monetary system. And when you have a system like that, you do need a lender of last resort. A lender of last resort means if a bank is in trouble, not because its balance sheet is weak, but because it has a cash problem, then you should lend money to it. You should lend money to it. You should even print money to lend it temporarily for as against good assets. And this is what Walter Bagehot said in 1872, I think, or 65, anyhow, in the 19th century. So that's one role. And yes, if you have the monetary system we have, you do need central banks to stop checking accounts being destroyed because they are money. That's quite a different thing to help companies that are bankrupt.
Indeed. And it's quite a different thing from bailing out the government from excess spending, which has got to be one of the fundamental reasons for quantitative easing. Yes. I mean, I just wonder what the interest rates would be in America and in Britain if the central banks didn't suddenly turn around and say, here's another £70 billion we're going to create out of thin air.
Yes, they have this idea that low interest rates and lots of money will give you growth. They may ease a situation immediately, but then people notice that it's really paper money, and I don't think that'll give you the growth that people want. Growth comes from other things. It comes from discovering new ways of doing things, from new resources, from people working harder, and so on, or people being better trained, etc., but not from money being sloshed about and sent around. So, indeed, I think that the dollar policy is one that's hurting the whole world, and especially hurting us in Europe, and we are following too. It's that and the fact that the American government needs money for its deficit. There's one thing that we economists say: when you have a government deficit, then you have a deficit in the balance of payments. And then you have other people who are selling you things and taking your money in exchange. And that has also political consequences, because the Chinese are taking green paper with Franklin's head on it, and perhaps IOUs from the American government, and they now have a lot of power over the American government. Because if they started selling that, they would hurt themselves, but they would hurt the Americans too. So the irresponsible way that the American government has been dealing with war and expenditure and war against terror and so on is undermining their power and undermining the power of the West. And I think it's very worrying that governments, and especially the American government, should misbehave in this way.
It does feel rather like end of empire in a sense, doesn't it?
Well, if they want to end their empire, let them do it. They have the resources to stay at the head of everything.
Pedro, it's been fascinating talking to you. I'd love to continue for another hour because there is so much to talk about and what's going on. But anyway, I'm very grateful for this opportunity to talk to you, and you know, let's hope that Spain and Europe don't quite disappear in the way in which some people think it might.
It seems they're going to listen to us because we have such a good network on the internet.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly. Thank you very much
Thank
indeed.
you.
One of the things I feel is that it's impossible for a reconstructed economy to work without savings. And I think
You hope to make a profit, but it's savings and investment. People don't seem to understand that investment is consumption. You use resources.
So often one reads comment that you've got the savings paradox and all this sort of rubbish.
It's an old story that comes from 1936
Yes.
and a man called Lord Keynes. Well, savings is investment, is consumption. You consume.
Question, because the more you print money, the more you destroy savings, because you're transferring capital from savings. It's capital destruction. What do you think that they might place an emphasis on savings in Spain, the new government?
People are beginning to say this, and the connection is savings and investment.
Exactly.
Investment is there because you get the future consumption. Hours of workers, and you consume resources and whatnot. So there's no opposition between savings and consumption. It's only that consumption must come further down the line, and that you should look for savings and the right atmosphere for savings. For investment, and that needs savings.
That needs
indeed.
savings, yeah.
And it needs savings not only.
The lesson of Germany's success has been that's a savings-driven economy, as opposed to a consumption-driven economy, which really describes most of the rest of Europe. Do you think that savings are central to any, if you like, long-lasting economic recovery? And I think this is a very important